It is 6 p.m. now, Cairo local time. It's a very good evening to all our viewers and welcome to Channel 2's English News Bulletin. I'm Angie Meher joining you for this evening, and we now begin with a look at the headlines. President Fattah al-Sisi holds a joint press conference with the Vietnamese President Luong Quang at the Ittihadiyya Presidential Palace. Egyptians continue voting in the second and final day of the Senate elections for 2025 inside the country. Gaza's Civil Defense Agency says 26... Welcome back. Now the details in full. President Fattah al-Sisi reiterated the importance of halting the escalation and ending the war on Gaza, as well as supporting the Palestinian people. The head of state noted that Egypt is exerting huge efforts to achieve a ceasefire deal in the Gaza Strip, adding that Egypt will always be the gate for humanitarian aid to the Palestinian people, not a gate for their displacement. The president's remarks were made during a joint press conference held with his Vietnamese counterpart, President Luong Quang, at the Ittihadiyya Presidential Palace. President al-Sisi further said that the war on Gaza has no justification and has become a war of starvation, genocide, and the liquidation for the Palestinian cause. President al-Sisi also said throughout the last 20 years, Egypt has been trying to contain the crisis with aiming to de-escalate the situation in Gaza, warning against military intervention which will lead to catastrophic consequences. For his part, the Vietnamese president said during the talks both sides agreed to collaborate in several fields, including culture, technology and education, as well as trade. Vietnamese president said they also agreed to develop the agricultural markets between the two countries and said investment opportunities were reviewed during their talks. Quang also said Vietnam backs the establishment of a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Earlier, President Fattah al-Sisi had received his Vietnamese counterpart and reviewed bilateral ties and means of boosting them. A high-level source denied what was reported by some media concerning a phone call between President Fattah al-Sisi and the U.S. President Donald Trump. The high-level source asserted any phone call by His Excellency President al-Sisi is to be announced according to what is being coordinated with heads of states and presidents. Meanwhile, accuracy must be abided level calls at this critical time, bearing in mind the situation in the Middle East in light of the comprehensive ties between President al-Sisi and U.S. President Donald Trump. President Fattah al-Sisi earlier reiterated Egypt's supportive stance for the Lebanese security, sovereignty and territorial integrity. President made the remarks in a phone call he received from the Lebanese President, Joseph Aoun. During the phone call, the head of state expressed Egypt's readiness to also support the Lebanese governmental efforts in launching reconstruction in the country. The phone call focused on enhancing bilateral ties, particularly in the economic, trade and investment aspects, meeting the aspirations of both peoples. The conversation also tackled the latest regional developments, particularly in Gaza, with the two leaders pressing for a ceasefire deal which would ensure the immediate access of urgently needed humanitarian aid for the Palestinians in the war-torn Strip. They further reaffirmed rejection of the Palestinian civilians' displacement from their land, as well as their legitimate right to an independent Palestinian state. The Foreign Minister Badr Abdulati on Monday continued his official visit to Uganda. Meeting with the Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, Abdulati conveyed a message from President Fattah al-Sisi to the Ugandan President in which he hailed the promoted level of bilateral ties. The top boosting cooperation with Uganda in different fields. Concerning Egypt's water security, Abdulati said the River Nile was an existential issue for Egypt, thus adding the state was looking forward to enhanced cooperation amongst Nile Basin countries. The meeting also touched on the latest security and political developments in the Horn of Africa and efforts of combating terrorism as well as fostering peace and security. Earlier, Abdulati said Egypt has attached top priority to upgrading its ties with Uganda. The remarks were made as the top diplomat held a meeting with Uganda's State Minister for Foreign Affairs, Henry Okello Oryem. Egypt's foreign and irrigation ministers are also participating in the second round of the 2+2 talks that brings them together with their Ugandan counterparts on the continent's water security file. The talks follow up the outcome of the first round of talks, which were hosted by Egypt in December of 2004. Egyptians, meanwhile, continue voting on Tuesday and the second and final day of the Senate elections for 2025 inside Egypt. Early on Monday, ballot boxes closed at 9 p.m. Cairo local time at the end of the first day of the voting. 2 hours to the closure, heavy voter turnout in different age groups and categories was observed, whether men, women, youth or elders, especially with the cooling of temperatures at the end of the official working hours at different areas. The Senate elections are being held inside Egypt on Monday and Tuesday, August the 4th and 5th. The elections are being held under full judicial supervision and media surveillance. At two press conferences held on the second and final day of the voting, the executive director of the National Election Authority, Councillor Ahmed Benderi, said that the vast majority of the polling stations opened their doors on due time in the different governorates nationwide. He said a few number of polling stations started late because of exceptional circumstances. A press conference headed by the executive director of the National Election Authority was joined by heads of the authority's follow-up committees at 27 courts in the different governorates via video conference. The committee's heads provided updates over the availability of the needed logistics inside the different electoral centers and over the proceedings of the voting. Welcome back. Still with more news. Convoys of food aid and medical supplies from Egypt to Gaza, organized by the Egyptian Red Crescent, headed to the Gaza Strip for the 7th consecutive day with more than 3,500 tons of urgent needed aid. This came within the framework of Egyptian efforts to support the Palestinian people in light of their critical humanitarian circumstances. Earlier, the National Alliance for Civil Development Work launched the 11th convoy to support Gaza with over 200 relief trucks. The relief convoy was loaded with 400 tons of essential food supplies based on actual needs. 13 organizations from the National Alliance were participating in the 11th convoy to support Gaza. Meanwhile, Gaza's Civil Defense Agency said 26 people were killed by Israeli gunfire and airstrikes on Tuesday, including 14 people who were waiting near an aid distribution site inside the Palestinian territory. Civil Defense spokesperson said 8 people were killed by Israeli gunfire whilst waiting for aid near the south of Gaza's food, near another distribution center. Thousands of Gazans gather daily near these food distribution points across Gaza, including 4 belonging to the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said earlier that he would convene his security cabinet this week to discuss how to instruct the military to meet his war goals in Gaza. Israel's Channel 2 cited an official from his office as saying that Netanyahu was inclining towards expanding the offensive and seizing the entire Palestinian enclave. Israeli military reported the cabinet will meet later Tuesday to make a decision on this issue. The United Nations Children's Agency asserted that 48 children were killed at least daily in the Gaza Strip as a result of looming Israeli continued aggression and famine for more than 2 years now. The UNICEF called for an immediate halt of the violence and aggression targeting innocents. They've been trying to obtain food from the appointed centers. The Trump administration has announced that U.S. and cities that boycott Israeli companies will be denied federal aid for natural disaster preparedness. The Federal Emergency Management Agency stated in grant notices posted earlier that states must follow its terms and conditions. The conditions require they certify they will not sever commercial relations, specifically with Israeli companies, to qualify for such funding. The requirement applies to at least $1.9 billion that states rely on to cover search and rescue equipment, emergency managers' salaries, as well as backup power systems, amongst other expenses. The requirement is the Trump administration's latest effort to use federal funding to promote its views on Israel. The Israeli military said early today it intercepted a missile fired from Yemen after air raid sirens sounded in several areas across the country. The Houthi group has been firing at Israel and attacking shipping lanes, saying that this was an act of solidarity with the Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Houthis have repeatedly said their attacks are an act of solidarity with Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. To Ukraine, one person was killed and 10 people, including 2 children, were wounded early on Tuesday morning as a result of Russia's largest air attack on the Ukrainian town of Lozova since the war began. Massive strike damaged a train station and other infrastructure in the town, a transport hub in the Kharkiv region bordering Russia. South Korea said it was removing loudspeakers used to blare K-pop and news reports to the north as the new administration in Seoul tries to ease tensions with its bellicose neighbor. The nation, still technically at war, had already halted propaganda broadcasts along the demilitarized zone, Seoul's military said in June after the election of President Lee Jae-myung. And moving to our business news, the Prime Minister, Dr. Mustafa Madbouli, chaired a meeting to follow up on projects and investments of the Administrative Capital Company for Urban Development. Madbouli said that the state attaches is a top priority following up on the activities of the Administrative Capital Company and its investments, highlighting the company's efforts in developing and managing projects at the new administrative capital to become a comprehensive model for smart, green and sustainable cities. And the Central Agency for Public Mobilization and Statistics announced that Egypt's trade deficit has declined 17.8% in May 2025. The CAPMAS noted deficit has reached $3.41 billion compared to $4.15 billion the same month of 2024. In its report, the CAPMAS said exports have increased 4.6%, whilst imports have fallen 6.7%. That wraps up our English News Bulletin here on Channel 2. My name is Angie Meher. Thank you for watching.